Good morning and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. Today is Wednesday, February the 7th, and we get an opportunity to begin a new day together. So trust you're feeling refreshed and ready to begin a new day. We're starting we're continuing this series today on the topic of this is life, with a particular emphasis on this topic of being rooted, finding this life in the midst of turbulent times. We begin by looking at the church in terms of its early beginnings. What was taking place at its very root? You read Acts 2:42 through 47, and you read that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And we saw in these four pillars, they were foundational to what comprised the gathering of the early church together. And as the early church got together, they began to share more and more of what Jesus had taught them. The fellowship became that much more important for their very survival in the midst of an environment that was becoming increasingly more and more hostile, not just to Jesus, as was seen in his crucifixion, right, and in his resurrection, but also it had everything to do with the way in which all of this now was being turned on to the apostles and ultimately to the followers. Because we'll find that for Peter and John, right, they're going to receive verbal abuse from the spiritual leadership of the day. That in turn would lead to an escalation where they would be physically assaulted and imprisoned, and then it would culminate in the eventual martyrdom of Stephen in Acts chapter 6. So you see, the spiritual environment is heated up, but also the Roman environment. Rome is going to come down really hard on Jerusalem and eventually destroy its temple by AD 70. So in a matter of just a few decades, you could see how the political powers, the religious powers of the day, all of this is coming down so hard on this new group that had been established, who are now these followers of Jesus of Nazareth. Well, what's going to make them stay together in the midst of this turbulent times? And then you just have to draw some parallels, right, to the days in which we're living. Such political polarization, such a widespread social media that doesn't look favorably, right, upon those who are adhering to this Judeo-Christian ethic. There is this woke environment that just seems to promote whatever seems right to a man, right? And yet we're being called to follow after this Jesus who came to die for the sins of men and to give them the hope of a resurrected life, a kingdom life that he says will far surpass what is happening in the world in which we find it. That ought to be what's giving us the most peace and the greater perspective on how to live this life with greater vitality. So, as we begin this morning, I'd like to take you to another thought. We began by first thinking of a couple of things. One was the apostles' teaching, right? So I want you to take note of that. Then there was this fellowship that is being mentioned in the scriptures. And so I thought this would be a good idea for you and me to think. We talked about the apostles' teaching yesterday. We looked at passages like 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, where it talks about how the word of God is God-breathed. God is the one who infuses this revelation of who he is, who we are, the world in which we're living, and the greater we grow closer to this wisdom, the better off we're going to be. And now we're being asked to take a look at this whole aspect of being a part of this fellowship. You know, my friends, this is probably one of the critical pieces, I think, that we're going to find in this study together on how to find this life in these turbulent times. Because what you will discover is that this life is all about a life that is surrounded by other believers who are pursuing the same things. So I'm putting a text up here for you that I'd like for you to take a look at in regards to this whole idea of fellowship and why it is so important. So, if you would, why don't this morning we're going to take a look at another passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 17 through 31. So, if you have a Bible, you can turn there with me. And what you begin to discover, what you will discover in this passage, is how Paul is looking at this fellowship, this community of believers that have come together, and why this is such an important part of living out our faith. It's a way for you and me to begin to not only have our minds informed, but also in the context of a relationship with others, how all of this is really going to come to fruition. How this good news about Jesus will be played out in one another's life. And it's a great passage that speaks about our interconnectedness and why that is so important. So if you would, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we'll take a look at this together, and we'll just share some thoughts about it. Okay, so 1 Corinthians chapter 12. This is a book that was written to a very how can I say it, a cosmopolitan city. It was wealthy. It was well educated, due to the fact that Corinth was it's found on the Greece where Greece is, but not on the main body. But when the main body comes up, it comes up to this tiny little neck of land before and then enlarging into the mainland. And that little isthmus that's there, it had two seaports to it. So it provided a lot of income, a lot of travel from people from all over the world. And it was in this very busy seaport and trade route that this church has been established. So as Paul begins to share with them why this fellowship is so important, look what he says here in verse 12. He says, the body is a unit that is made up of many parts. And though all its parts are many, they form one body, right? So you get this idea that now what Paul is speaking to you and me about is this idea, and I'm just correcting the text here for you. So, beginning at verse 12, what Paul is really using as an illustration is this physical body that we have. This physical body, he says, it's one, but it's comprised of many different parts. And then he says, drawing this analogy, he says, listen, we were all baptized by one Spirit into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. So if there is a unity now within our body, even though it has many parts, he wants us to see that it's the same for the church. We are those now who have all been baptized by one Spirit. This is the Spirit that Jesus now pours out into the world, a spirit of power, a spirit of love, a spirit of truth, right? This is the Spirit now that is going to guide us into all truth. It is the Spirit that is going to bring comfort into one's life. Um, Another little side journey could be looking through John chapters 14, 15, and 16, where it gives us a little bit more insight into the Spirit that Jesus is about to pour out into the world. But notice Paul then, after having drawn this, comparison between our body and the body of Jesus, and how integral it is that we are all brought together by this one Spirit. That Spirit will bring this sense of unity from people who are Jews or Greeks, right? The Gentiles, whether they're slaves or free, doesn't matter. We all have this one Spirit that we're drinking from. It's what makes us family, right? Now, look what here it says in verse 14. The body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be a part of the body. Right? If our body could communicate that way, just because this hand says it doesn't belong to the body, doesn't mean it's so. And he says, and if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body. Well, it would not for that reason cease to be part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? And if the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? In fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. And if they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you. And the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. So what a delicate way of talking about this body and saying how integral it is for the whole body to be together. All we need is for some parts of our body not to cooperate. What is that a sign of? Right? That's a sign that things aren't going well. That there is this, this disequilibrium that has taken place within the body. I've had an opportunity to see some families deal with some catastrophic kind of illnesses. One that will always remain in my mind. It was a professor at our local seminary when I was living in Oregon. And he wrote a book about suffering, about where is God in the midst of turbulent times. And it was such an insightful book. And then I realized why, because his wife was suffering from this rare disease where where her brain was sending all kinds of false messages to her hands and to her limbs, to her face, facial muscles. It just sent all these weird impulses so that she would move and her hands involuntarily would jerk. It was really it was sad to watch, and yet in the midst of that, there was such a tenderness about his writings, and such a love that God had put between him and his wife, and I'll never forget that. But I mention it because the body has to work. If the body is working well, it leaves room for all the distinctive parts to play a part. And then he adds this at the end of verse 24. He says, God has combined the members of the body and has given greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. We don't often think about our stomachs, right? We're more thoughtful, maybe about what our hair looks like and what we're doing with our faces. But nobody's thinking about your intestines normally until what? Until something goes wrong with them. And then all of a sudden you're looking everywhere you can for some remedy that's just going to give you a sense of relief. And here it says God has combined the members of the body, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it. Right? We start paying attention to a large and small intestine when that's not our first thought when we wake up in the morning. And all of this so that there would be this sense of unity, a harmony that exists within our physical body. Now he's saying, in the same way, right? This is the body of Christ. His church is this body. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. And then he adds, you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And in the church, God has appointed apostles, prophets, teachers, workers of miracles, also those having gifts of healing, those able to help others, those with gifts of administration, those speaking in different kinds of tongues. It says, are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, do all work miracles, do all have gifts of healing, do all speak in tongues, do all interpret? And it's a rhetorical question, but the answer is no. Why? Because God has so ordered the church that he has poured out all kinds of gifts into that church. That's what this paragraph is underscoring, that the Spirit of God has gifted each one as he has determined. Some are going to have great gifts of compassion. Others will have gifts of teaching, right? Others will show great hospitality. Others will show great administration and leadership. These are all gifts that God has poured out to the church. We need them all. If we're going to accomplish what God has called us to, it's going to be because everyone has come prepared to serve the greater body. And you'll see that in the way the gifts are being distributed. So when I read this passage here in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, I'm reminded again that why this fellowship is so important. Just like your body, if it was up to you, you want your body whole. You want all of its parts working together. If they're not, that would be a sign of some kind of disease, right? Something is wrong. It's the same way with the church. If the church is going to survive the turbulent times in which it finds itself, and the truth of the matter is, God's people from the very beginning have always found themselves in opposition to the way in which the world is being played out. We're being asked to live in this world with kingdom principles. And sometimes it seems like it's upside down. But God's saying, listen, I put this body together, and I wanted to demonstrate a unity. I wanted to demonstrate to the world around me, to the world around it, that they have taken this good news of Jesus seriously. How seriously? Well, what comes next is this whole talk about what's even greater than the gifts that God has given to the church. And we see it here. He says, if I speak in tongues of men and of angels, right? He's speaking of these spiritual gifts now that God has given, right? He says, but if I don't have love, I'm nothing more than a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. I can have gifts of prophecy. I can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge. I can even have a faith that can move mountains, right? Again, a spiritual gift that now we're beginning to experience. But he says, but if I exercise that gift without love, not only am I a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal, somebody's just making a whole lot of noise, but I am nothing. And in verse 3, he says, if I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flames, right? This whole idea of compassion and mercy and hospitality, right? People that now have been, their eyes have been opened by the Spirit here. He says, but if I do even those things without love, I gain nothing. So most people don't connect the first part of 1 Corinthians 13 with what just transpired in chapter 12. It's not that we should be rejoicing just in the fact that we have these gifts, but we have these gifts and they are being exercised with love, because the whole body then is going to be the beneficiary of that. Well, just now think about this church and the way it could become this refuge and source of strength for so many people living in very turbulent times. People who encourage one another, look out for one another, help one another, serve one another, forgive one another. All of a sudden now I have a community of people that are seeking to demonstrate this love of God in very hands-on ways. This teaching that we have received is now landing the plane in people's lives. Yeah, my friends, this is why when that early church got together, and the fellowship was an integral part of what they were all about, because we're a body. We're the body of Jesus. We are this church of God. We are this family that needs to be looking out for one another. And like any good family, you can't do that at a distance. It requires our time, and it will require our greatest efforts. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking some time this morning to just consider again with me all of what it means to find life in this turbulent time. This is part of a whole Rooted series, and we're beginning it by just taking a look at what established this early church so that we could follow suit. Well, my friends, again, thank you so much for joining me on this Wednesday, February the 7th. And Lord willing, we'll spend some more time again tomorrow. God bless.